Let's talk about the early days of cable and satellite television. First, a side note. I got involved in television before I started my radio career, which has been going on since really 1972. How did I get started in television earlier than that? Well, I was in high school, and a buddy of mine came to me and said, there's a new cable TV outlet that's opening, and they're looking for talent. They're looking for people to have shows. Would you like to have a TV show? His idea was that we would model it after the Today Show, or we would model it after the Tonight Show. He would be Johnny Carson, that is the host, who would interview people, and we would invite people from area high schools and so forth. There were a number of high schools in Daytona Beach, so that would be easy. We had a lot of people that we knew and a lot of people we could get to be on the show. I would be the band leader, like in those days on the Tonight Show, Doc Severinsen. I'm a trumpet player. I love the idea of wearing fancy, flashy clothes, so I thought, hey, this will be great. So I put together a little band. We built the furniture, and Holly Hill Cable hired us, so to speak. They didn't really pay us anything, but they let us have an hour every week on Monday nights from 7 till 8 Eastern Time to be on television. Well, what kid wouldn't want to do that, right? And that's how we got started in the wonderful world of cable TV. Now, what did cable TV mean? Well, in those days, cable meant, and particularly in places like Florida that is very, very flat, that instead of everybody in, say, Daytona having their own individual antenna to pick up WESH TV, which was the NBC affiliate, and there was a CBS affiliate from Orlando, which was close, and an ABC affiliate from Jacksonville, which was a little further away, and that's all the TV stations there were. That's all the networks that television had in the late 1960s and early 1970s. So you could get those three systems, and that was more than most people could get at their house. So they put up a really tall antenna and ran cables to your house, hence the name cable TV. Well, we ran for several months, I want to say 6 months, on Holly Hill Cablevision, and we did the show again over the next summer and actually got paid a little for it, but we had to also go out and try to sell subscriptions to, I think it was Daytona, just called Daytona Beach Cable. That was the end of our TV career, or at least as a duo it was. But it was valuable experience. It gave me a lot of idea what it means to have to do live television and have to be able to ad-lib in case things don't go as planned, and that often happens. One week, none of our guests showed up for a 1-hour show, so we had the band play everything that we knew, which was probably only 5 or 6 tunes at that point. It was early in the season. Fred and I, would make up skits during public service announcements that would buy us some time, and then we'd make up skits. So the next week, everybody showed up, including all the people that we'd invited to be on the week before. So that was another situation we had to deal with. But as you could see, great training for being in live performance. Well, cable came about because people wanted to be able to see more channels in their homes. Something else was going on, too. In the early 70s, amid concerns about increasing violence and sexual frankness in TV primetime when children were watching, Primetime Access and Family Hour was developed to add an hour for local programming at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Syndication's new innovation of stripping allowed classic TV shows to be aired at that time each evening, Monday through Friday. So I Love Lucy, Gilligan's Island, and so forth. The invention of portable, lightweight TV cameras allowed TV coverage to be pervasive. Sports coverage was greatly increased by innovations like the portable TV cameras and videotape machines. The first ones were in 1956. They cost $30,000. Well, by the mid-'60s, they were a lot smaller, a lot cheaper, a lot lighter, because they were using solid state instead of tubes. In 1975, Betamax came along, which was basically the industry standard, and a year later, VHS, and that became the standard that stayed, video cassette tapes. Deregulation during the Reagan years meant less daily interference by the FCC, which made TV and radio stations very happy. There was an enormous amount of paperwork that we had to do prior to 1976, vast amounts of paper that we had to keep track of. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, formed in the late 60s, included radio and television. And radio ended up having shows like The Prairie Home Companion, which began in the 1980s and ran for 25 years on public radio. And on television, you had shows like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. You had Sesame Street. You had Schoolhouse Rock. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting involved the U.S. government in what used to be private enterprise in subsidized competition with privately owned radio and television stations. So it was not enormously popular among the owners and operators of privately owned radio and television stations who felt it was unfair that the government should take tax money and be their competition. Well, anyway, cable TV grew in the early 1970s. The FCC set guidelines for local origination, which is what we were involved in when I was in cable TV, and for public access. Copyright fees had to be adjusted for cable systems that rebroadcast local TV stations who had already paid copyright fees. 1975, a dramatic change in satellite programming and cable programming because home box office began distributing movies and special events via satellite. Formed in 1972 by Time Incorporated, the company decided to expand the service to other cable systems. Also that year, this outfit came along called the Superstation. The Superstation was a little TV station in Atlanta owned by Ted Turner. He put his station signal on the same satellite as HBO, which meant that cable operators who bought a dish for HBO could also get Turner's station for one of their channels. This created what became known as superstations. Cable operators paid a dime for the service but did not charge the customers as much as they did for HBO. Turner covered his station costs by charging more for advertising since the signal now was national and not just local. New satellite service called Direct Broadcast Satellite was developing. In original dishes, if you wanted to buy a dish and put it in your backyard, were ridiculously expensive. No one could afford it, $150,000 for a dish for their backyard. But by 1977, smaller dishes were around $10,000, and more cable systems could afford that because that allowed them to get access to stations like TBS and HBO and so forth. In 1979, the FCC ruled that no one needed a license to own a TV receive-only satellite dish, which were now about $1,000. One outcome of that was that Satellite TV Corporation informed the FCC it wanted a new service that would go directly from satellite to home. Another result of the ruling was that people, especially in rural areas, could buy their own dish and pick up signals from cable TV stations free. This became known as backyard satellite reception. The people that owned cable TV outfits, of course, called this piracy, but the number of people that did it was so small, they did not pursue them. Sparked by satellite services, cable grew at an enormous rate. Between 1975 and 1980, cable profits grew by 641%. City councils decided which companies would be used in their cities. Only one company could sign a franchise. Cities could request a certain number of channels for access by community groups. These channels were referred to as Public Education and Government Channels, also called PEG. To program these channels, cable companies would promise equipment and personnel to run the channel. Now, what became interesting about this for us is that Trojan Vision, which in those days was called TSU-TV, actually came about as a result of a locally owned cable system, Troy Cable, one of whose owners was the president of the university. And he knew about the local origination and about the restrictions on local cable TV that they had to have an actual operating studio. And he got to thinking that he can make everybody happy. He applied for a grant. There were new grants that were available at that time to try to set up TV stations in universities around America. You could get a grant to outfit a TV studio. Now, you still had to have somebody run the equipment, but the idea was you could use that equipment to train students who would then, when they finish their degree, go out into the world and have actual experience in using cameras and being on camera and so forth. Well, Troy State University in those days took advantage of that, and it has been a magnificent success. For over 40 years, we've been training people with actual experience. But it all came out of that. So for a long time, Trojan Vision was also the studio for Troy Cable. When the owners restructured in the early 90s, Trojan Vision stayed on the air as a separate entity. And Troy Cable, reconfigured with new ownership and everything, built their own studios and still has their own studios and maintains them and uses them. And they produce original programming as well as having lots and lots of programming of a local type. That is to say, people who go out and record a high school ball game and things like that, and they can put it on the air there. Now, getting back to the multiple system operators, the MSOs, companies realized they would not get a return on their investments for years, and so they began to take over the smaller mom-and-pop operations, and then they were consolidated into larger companies. Advertisers became interested in these new markets, unions became involved, and were soon recognized as part of the industry. Equipment manufacturers benefited the most because they supplied converters and dishes and cable. Space on a satellite became more precious as the number of companies that wanted it increased, so more and more satellites got launched. More and more communication satellites got launched because of the capital outlay and because there was an opportunity to make money on it. Happily enough, we had the space shuttle by then, and one of the things the space shuttle did was to put these kind of satellites into orbit and also to go back and repair the older satellites that were starting to show wear and tear. Now, Time had HBO, home box office. Viacom had Showtime. Warner Amex began the Movie Channel. Other pay services started in rapid succession. Spotlight, a Times Mirror movie service. Bravo, the Entertainment Channel. The Disney Channel. Playboy. Basic cable such as ESPN. All sports programming started by Getty Oil. Black Entertainment Television, BET, programming for African Americans. CBN, Christian-oriented broadcasting. Nickelodeon, children's service. CNN, 24 hours a day news, which started in 1980. USA, a variety network. C-SPAN, coverage of the House of Representatives. MTV, creator of music videos. And Cable Health Network, programming about physical and mental health. The number of superstations also grew, including WGN out of Chicago, WGN out of Chicago, and WWOR out of New York. Cable services developed for cable as well. Satellite TV was introduced by such local